over time, we have to rewire that voice and we have to turn the I can't into why I must, right? Because as soon as we turn it into a must, it's a lot easier to take massive action. Focus only comes when one thing has happened, and it's arguably the most important thing that creates focus and therefore progress in anyone's life, and that is Bill Gates and Warren Buffett both agreed on one thing, and that is the most important skill that any entrepreneur can have that wants to be successful is the skill of focus. But focus only comes when one thing has happened, and it's arguably the most important thing that creates focus and therefore progress in anyone's life, and that is decisiveness. The power of decisiveness. I'm going to share some statistics on the power of decisiveness and having crystal clear goals. So let's dive into this. A Harvard Business Review study found that people who write down their goals and create action plans for them are 42% more likely to achieve them. I believe there was this study that they did in Harvard where they had like 100 people that they randomly surveyed, and I think two of the people had written goals. A certain, other cohort had non-written goals. They just had them in their mind. And then the others had no goals at all, right? And it was clear, I believe that the two people who had written goals, they saw 100 times the success of everyone else who did not have written goals. If we look at another study, goal clarity is the number one predictor of workplace performance. A Gallup study found that teams with clearly defined goals are 20% more productive and 10 times more engaged, 10 times more engaged than those without. 92% of people never actually achieved their goals. Only 8% actually accomplished their New Year's resolutions. Another statistic I found really powerful: indecision leads to inaction and lost opportunities. The average person makes 35,000 decisions per day, okay? Even small hesitations compound into decision fatigue, which reduces productivity by up to 40%. Another one, McKinsey and Company found that fast decision makers are twice as likely to deliver high-quality decisions and 1.5 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes than slow decision makers. What does all of this tell us? Decide, commit, act, succeed, repeat. Decide, commit, act, succeed, repeat. This 5-step cycle is the mothership secret to success. If you never decide on where you're going and what you want, it's almost impossible to achieve it. And most people actually never decide on what they want, and therefore it's really hard to stay focused and to stay focused on one thing and to leverage that skill that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett agreed on, focus, and how critical that is. It's hard to be focused when you don't know where you're going and you aren't decisive about that, right? The word decide, okay, the second half of the word decide, side, okay, C-I-D-E, that means to cut away from, right? So to decide, right? What that means in some capacity, based on the derivation of the word, is you're actually cutting away all other options, right? And what you're left with is a decision. What you're left with is what you actually commit to. And most people never really commit to anything. So we're going to unpack a little bit about why decision is the superpower and how do you actually leverage decisiveness in your life so that you can have world-class focus like a laser beam and achieve more income or impact than you've ever achieved before just by having a better decisiveness factor. So I remember when I got started in business, I read a book called Think and Grow Rich. This book was life-changing for me, and the book told me to recite out loud my major definite purpose every single morning, right? So every single morning, I had a financial target that I set for myself for that year, right? And every single day, I would repeat that goal to myself out loud, verbally. And it was probably the craziest experience I had in my life. When I started doing this after a period of months, goals that I thought were completely unreasonable, because most importantly, my actions aligned with my words. I didn't just talk out loud in positive, words of affirmation or, positive affirmations. I didn't just, talk affirmations to myself. I matched my actions to it, right? Which is the say-do ratio, as I call it. Because you can tell yourself a million times what you want, right? But if your actions don't align with it, then you're not going to achieve it, right? So step one is decide. We need to decide on exactly what we want in our health, right? Exactly what we want in our financials, exactly what we want in our business, and create as searingly clear of an ideal future outcome in our minds. And that's really step one, is decide. Okay. Then it's commit. Now, why is decide and commit completely different? Well, think about it like this. How many people have you ever met who have decided to lose weight at the beginning of the year, right? You've probably met dozens, maybe even hundreds of people who have decided to lose weight at the beginning of the year, right? How many of them actually commit to a plan to take action on that decision, right? Very, very, very few, right? And that's why you see gyms super filled at the beginning of the year, and then you see gyms empty out, come March. And that's because most people give up on that decision, right? So decide, commit is step two, and commitment is typically where the majority of people lose steam on their goals, right? So commitment, I call this, it really the nature's way of sifting through who's serious and who's not serious, right? So decide, commit, and then act is step three. What is act? Okay, once you've decided, once you committed to a plan, then our thinking brain gets turned off and we're in massive action mode, right? We are doing the thing. We are on the path. When we're on the path, we still remember what we decided on. We still remember what we committed to, but we're on the path. We're executing, right? Decide, commit, act, succeed. Okay, what's success? Success means you start seeing some wins, right? As you start taking some action. Maybe the success isn't exactly what you committed to or what your decision was, right? But at least you start seeing some wins, right? As you start seeing some wins, you start feeling that feeling of success, right? And what the average person does is they stop there, right? They go, oh, I'm successful now, and then they stop, right? That's why the last step is repeat, right? It's only 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% of successful people who can create success for themselves and then recreate it, right? So decide, commit, act, succeed, repeat, right? So this 5-step cycle, if you're not seeing the results in your life, you got to ask yourself, which one of these 5 have I broken? Which one of these 5 am I not keeping my word with myself, right? And sometimes, if you're already successful, you're stuck at the repeat level. You have no reason, deep down, or maybe an emotional reason or a financial reason, there's no reason to repeat. This is why what happens when people get their first flash of success and their financial needs get met, hard to motivate yourself again, right? Because if your number one motivator when you got started on your path to success, if your number one motivator was money, and now money is handled and money is no longer a problem, it's no longer what you're setting goals around, well, then your entire paradigm has changed. You have to change the way through which you set goals. You have to set goals from a place of intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is we do it for our own reasons, right? Internal reasons. Extrinsic is we do it because we want something, more money, right, etc. So another form of extrinsic, by the way, is recognition, right? Recognition is outside of you. Only someone else can recognize you, right? So that's still an extrinsic form of motivation. Once you get that recognition, this is why like people who want to be celebrities their whole life, they then become celebrities and they lose their sense of purpose because now they've gotten what they've wanted their whole life, but it's external from them. It's not what they actually deep down wanted to scratch their own deep underlying desires, right? So I know for me, every single step I've encountered in my business, I've run into obstacles in each of these 5 areas. Decision was super easy for me in the beginning because I didn't have a plan B, right? When I quit my job at Yellow Pages, there was no plan B. So it was easy to decide on, generating millions of dollars in revenue in my companies because I had no plan B. And that's what all my role models had showed me was possible. So it made perfect sense to decide to burn the ships, to commit to that goal, to take massive action on that goal because I had no plan B, right? But then through different, trials and tribulations, sometimes it gets hard to decide again. Sometimes it gets hard to commit again. So I remember, there was a period in our business where we saw a ton of problems in our company's profits, right? This a couple of years ago when we were growing really fast, over 100% per year. And our profits just weren't doing good. It was a pretty scarring experience. And as a result of constantly feeling like we just could never figure out profits in our own business, I kind of stopped being decisive around that area of the business. I stopped deciding how much we wanted to profit as a company, as an example, because I felt kind of helpless. I felt like, it doesn't really matter if I make a decision here anymore, right? It's just going to end up where it ends up. And maybe we're just not good at, profit. Maybe we're just good at, other things in the business, right? And that same thing applies whenever you encounter a failure. Let's say you set a goal to lose weight and it didn't work before. Well, it's hard to re-decide to lose weight when last year you decided the same thing and you didn't take any action on it, right? This is how people enter into what's called learned helplessness, right? Where you have this underlying negativity of sorts that this voice in the back of your head that basically tells you what you can't do, right? And over time, we have to rewire that voice and we have to turn the I can't into why I must, right? Because as soon as we turn it into a must, it's a lot easier to take massive action. So learned helplessness ties in commitment, right? Why is commitment hard at times? Commitment's hard because commitment is sacrifice, right? When you commit to something, when you commit to a plan and you make a decision around that plan, right? Let's say like commitment is, if you want to lose weight, the example of that is, well, I got to only eat 2,000 calories a day, 6 days a week, right? So the commitment is, am I willing to commit to that plan? Am I willing to have such a deep reason why I want to succeed that I'm willing to stick through even days when I'm hungry, days when I don't feel like it, days I feel like I didn't have enough sleep? Am I willing to stick through on a calorie deficit, right? If you want to get in the best shape of your life, let's say you're tired and you don't want to go to the gym and it's your second week working out. What do you do in that circumstance, right? Someone who's committed, they'll find their way to success, right? They'll find their way to stick through with that commitment, right? But it's hard at times because it takes sacrifice, right? Most times commitment is pain now for pleasure later, right? Act, right? Why is it hard at times to act? Well, because you have competing priorities, especially if you're not clear on what your one big decision or commitment is. You're always going to have priority overload, right? So it's hard to act consistently in the areas that drive your life forward, right? When you have so many competing priorities, if you look at your calendar, what percent of your calendar during your week is filled with calendar items and calendar events that directly relate to your life goals, right? And if you go enough week after week after weeks in a row and you don't have things that you're spending time on that advance you to your goals will perish. I mean, you'll eventually lose track of your goals. You'll stop caring about them, and you'll go back to what you did before, right? And, succeed and repeat, they're pretty self-explanatory. Either you succeed or you don't, and either you choose to double down and recreate that success or you don't, right? But the first three is what I see are like the big make or break kind of pillars of getting on a success train in any area of your life or business. So why is decisiveness kind of the spark of this process? Well, like we said, goal clarity is the number one predictor of workplace performance, okay? If you don't know what you want, okay? If you don't know what you want, it's almost impossible to get what you want, right? Because if you haven't even accomplished step one, which is knowing what you want, it's almost impossible to get what you want if you're not clear with yourself about what you want, right? So how do we create such a laser beam of clarity around what we want? What do you want? By what date? Why? This is so mission critical to get right. So what do you want as a outcome, right? What do you want as an emotion? Why are these two different things? Well, because outcome is typically going to be something a little bit more tangible. Emotion is going to be something a little more intangible, like in your emotional state. And then the third is why, right? So what outcome do you want? What emotional state do you want? And why, right? And, Simon Sinek wrote a book, Start With Why. The greatest leaders in the world, they actually lead from a place of why they do what they do rather than just what they want. So if you don't have a strong driving force behind what you want, it's very hard to stick through the hard days and when things don't go to plan, right? We all know this. And oftentimes, this is why what we want is in direct correlation to our biggest, most painful moments in our life. I know for me, my family went bankrupt in 2008. And for me, part of the reason I've set financial goals to build a big business is because my family had a small business. They went under during 2008. So my biggest pain became my goal setting seed, right? Became the reason I set a goal to start my own business because I didn't want to happen to my family what happened to my growing up family. So on the other side of sometimes your biggest pain in life can become the platform through which you set your goals, right? And it's not unusual that these things are one and the same. So having a why can be rooted to your most painful life experience, right? Or a handful of your most painful life experiences. Why? Because pain is 2 times a greater motivator than pleasure. Oftentimes, when we say, oh, I want this, I want more money so I can buy a car, so I can buy a yacht, right? That's not going to motivate someone as much as I want to build a big business because I watched both my parents almost, commit suicide when my family went bankrupt in 2008. And I don't want that to happen for my family, right? Who's more likely to succeed? Someone who says they want to build a $10 million business because they want a Rolls Royce, or someone who wants to build a $10 million business because both of their parents almost committed suicide because of bankruptcy in 2008, and you don't want that to happen to your family? Pretty simple to see who's going to be a little bit more motivated just because of the depth of the why. So we have to create reasons in our mind that motivate us on that emotional level so that our why is anchored in not just pleasure, but the avoidance of pain, right? And a great exercise to do this, to get yourself really decisive on what you want, is to get really clear on what you don't want, right? This is like the opposite of decisiveness around what you want and being super decisive on what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what you want to get as a result of it. So look at the opposite. Look at what you don't want, right? Imagine your life doesn't change for the next 45 years, right? Or imagine your life doesn't change for the next 5 years. Then apply that to 10, apply that to 15, apply that to 20, apply that to 25. Keep projecting it out, right? Now imagine that you get old and frail and you start getting filled with regret with all the things in life that you didn't take action on, right? And imagine that old, frail you in the future, that the only thing you have to look at is your regrets because of how little action you took, right? How little time that you spent with your family, how little time you actually, gave something more than yourself to your family or left a legacy for your family, right? So think about all these things and really twist the knife in yourself and make yourself understand with searing clarity what you don't want, right? And on the opposite side of what you don't want is going to be what you do want, right? And as soon as you get clear on the inverse of what you don't want, right, then you're able to start really painting that picture of, okay, wait a second, let's burn the ships here. Let's go all in, right? Here's like a big word of caution for this, for knowing what you want, is you have to understand how much of what you want is going to be rooted in the past, right? Oftentimes, most of our decisions for the future are rooted in our decisions and realities from the past, right? Oftentimes, we subconsciously or consciously look at the past for evidence as to what we can accomplish in the future, right? And, if you look at the kind of the world of business, like when someone makes a forecast for their business, right, projecting how much their revenues are going to be next year, their profits are going to be next year, or whatever metric is going to be next year in a business, what do they base it on? Well, they base it on the rolling 12 months, past 12 months of data, right? So most decisions in business are rooted from historical information, right? When an athlete is, vetted in order to, join the NFL or a professional sports league, their performance is analyzed based on real time and or past data, right? So this is what, makes potential, sports teams offer one athlete, $30 million a year and another athlete, $500,000 a year, right? And it's all based on historical data. When we were in school, we were trained to study historical data and then to take tests on that information, right? Not many of the tests that we took when we were younger in school were based on creative thinking and creative output, right? The majority of what we took tests on in school was based on studying information typically presented to you from the past and then regurgitating that information. So when it comes to us constructing our lives, it's no guess, no surprise that we root a lot of our decisions in the past and in the present, right? And the risk of doing that is we stop operating from intuition and we stop operating from our gut and from what we truly want. Like, how many people are dissatisfied with what they do with their lives? I think the number is like close to 80% of people are actively dissatisfied with what they do. That's the majority of society, right? If the majority of society were to continue banking their future decisions based on their present or past, what would it look like? Well, it would look like 80% of people would remain dissatisfied with their lives. Why? Because they'd look at what they did last year and they'd make a decision from a survival standpoint and say, well, all I've done is software work my whole life. I've gotten by doing that. Maybe that's just what it is for me because that's what my past has shown, right? It's really hard to detach from your past and to kind of rebirth yourself because it feels like an identity crisis. And oftentimes when our identity gets challenged, it feels like death because our identity is our social reality, right? Just like our body is our physical reality, our identity is our social reality, right? And when our social reality gets challenged or quote unquote threatened to be killed, then we get scared. We feel anxious, right? So this is why it's really hard to make course corrections in our lives. If you've ever read or watched the Arnold documentary or read his biography on Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think it's still maybe on Netflix, and it goes through the 3 chapters of his life, right? Bodybuilder, chapter 1, chapter 2, actor, chapter 3, government. And, love or hate Arnold Schwarzenegger, the courage to steer your entire life on a dime to a completely different direction, and at each steering of the wheel to set a grand goal, right? Like when he went into bodybuilding, he said he wants to be the #1 bodybuilder in the world. And here's the key: he did it, right? When he said he wanted to go into acting, he said he wanted to be the highest paid actor ever. And at the time, he accomplished that. And then he wanted to, he said he wanted to be the governor of California, and he accomplished that, right? I mean, he didn't enter these course corrections in his life saying, I just want to be an average government employee, or, I'd like to be a top 90 bodybuilder, or I'd like to be a top 100 actor in the US. No, he entered with such a grand ambition with each of these course corrections, and yet he rooted that with action alignment, right? And I call it distance to action, right? As soon as you've clarified what you want, what your goal is, how far away from that decision is your first big scary action, right? The quicker you can scare the shit out of yourself after making a big decision on a big goal that you want to pursue by taking a big leap, the more likely you are to achieve that goal, right? The longer you procrastinate, and, this is why people say, like, in the whole kind of passive income world, which is really a myth, because the only way you get passive income is through active income and actually having skills that you learn through work and time input. But this whole passive income myth says that you never want to pursue a second flow of income until the second flow surpasses X% of your first flow, right? So let's say that you work a job and you have like some other thing that you do, and the income from that other thing equals 75% of what you make from your job, right? Well, the passive income people would say, like, get it to a certain percent and then go all in on that other thing, right? But anybody who's successful would tell you that going all in is probably one of the hardest things to do, but it's the only way that the universe actually rewards you for doing something. You can't get rewarded by dabbling. You can't get rewarded by stepping your toe halfway in the water, feeling out the temperature, being scared, saying, I'm going to get back to it in 2 years. Then maybe I'll dip my foot back in the water again. And that's where it comes to decisiveness, right? So you look at this Arnold kind of rebirth, which I've talked about in other content that I put out in the past, and you ask yourself, like, what is required to be that decisive and to turn your entire life's mission on a dime, right? Well, number one at the top of the list is confidence, right? You've got to have confidence that you can actually do it, right? I remember when I was in a band in college. One day I went to everyone in my band and I quit, and I was the lead singer of the band. And it was, the band was pretty serious. I mean, we were playing shows in front of, thousands of people, and it was pretty serious. It was like the primary investment of our time through college. And what was difficult to me was that decision-making process was really scary for me, because that was a part of my identity. For the last, prior to me quitting the band, I mean, that was probably 10 years of my life that I was a musician. That was the main thing that I did. When I stopped racing dirt bikes, I got into music. And same thing happened in dirt bikes, by the way. Dirt bikes, I was forced outside of racing dirt bikes in 2010 because my family ran out of money and I went to school. I had to, and it was a crazy identity crisis. But I told myself, I want to get straight A's in school. And that was a stupid goal. I wish I never set that goal because that was a big waste of time that did not benefit me as well as I thought it would. But yet, we've all made these course corrections in our lives, right? And if hindsight was 2020, most of us would wish that the course corrections we made were infused with more confidence, right? Infused with more burn the ships mentality, going all in on this decision, truly rebirthing myself, truly pursuing excellence in this new area, rather than I'm going to kind of try this new thing, and if it works out, then maybe I'll leave what I'm currently doing, right? Which is how most people make decisions, and that's why most people don't see breakthrough results. It's the 1% of people who can stake their entire future on one outcome that's unproven and put so much confidence behind that one outcome that they'll stake their entire future on that one outcome, right? It's that type of person that sees the disproportionate returns, right? So confidence is the first pillar of being able to make those kind of course corrections. The second pillar is proving to yourself that the confidence was right, right? What do I mean by that? So proving to yourself that the confidence was right, this means that you have a chip on your shoulder and you want to prove to yourself that you made the right decision, that the confidence wasn't just, overstated enthusiasm. No, that your results show you definitive proof that the decision that you made is validated in real life results, right? And that step is often why most people don't continue to set big goals for themselves, because you set a big goal once, maybe it worked once, but then maybe it didn't work the second or third time. So you stop setting big goals because deep down your confidence is hurt, right? And deep down your belief in the accuracy of your confidence gets jeopardized. And these are two completely different things. One thing to be confident, it's another thing to have scar tissue towards the times when you feel confident. If, for example, let's say last time you felt super confident you're going to start your own business or whatever, you felt really confident about it, right? But if that didn't materialize, if you actually didn't start your own business and you didn't hit the goal that you set, you're going to lose a little ounce of trust with yourself. So then the next time that you feel super confident about something, you're going to doubt it. Your subconscious mind, because your mind is there to protect you, right? Our brains are ice age brains. Our brains are not here to propel us towards grand pursuits, unless you have what the modern medical system would call a mental illness, which I've been blessed with, hypomania, which people call a mental illness. That means that I just have a little bit too much dopamine every now and then, which I'm very grateful for. But technically, people say that that's on the bipolar spectrum. And, what I say is, a couple hundred years ago, that would just be, oh, that's Teddy. He's super high energy and he gets excited about ideas. But now that's become a disorder. So you have to have floods of confidence, and then you have to prove yourself right that confidence was actually right? And you do that through your results, right? And if you look at the best athletes, they're results focused. If you look at the best entrepreneurs, they're results focused. If you look at the best artists, they're results focused. They're not work focused. When you become a true self-creator, you exit the work economy and you become the results economy, right? That doesn't mean you can't be an employee, or someone can't be an employee for you who's in the results economy. That's just going to be your top performing employee, right? Like, for example, if you have a salesperson that works, 30 hours a week or 40 hours, 30 hours a week, let's say, and that salesperson gets 100 times the results of another salesperson on your team that works 80 hours a week, do you care that that person only works 30 hours a week if they get 100 times the results of the other seller? No, it doesn't matter, right? All we care about as entrepreneurs is results, right? All we care about in our life is results, right? Let's say you went to the gym every single day for 2 years and you put on a ton of body fat and you got into the worst shape of your life, right? Well, what mattered more? The result of you going to the gym or the fact that you showed up and went to the gym every single day, right? Well, did you do the right things in the gym? Did you push yourself hard enough? Are you tracking your calories outside the gym? What really matters is the results that we want, right? When you enter the results economy, you understand that the way that I build confidence and I build the belief that when I feel confident, it's actually accurate is by getting results. So how do you embrace the results economy? Well, you have to understand that every unit of what you do should be geared towards a result. Yeah. Like results orientation, right? If you want to be a better, dad, if you want to be a better wife, if you want to be a better husband, right? You could try, try all the things in the world to be a better dad. But at the end of the day, if your kid hates spending time with you, right, you haven't done your job. So get back to the results. You should be doing things that ultimately lead to the end result, which is, if that's what you want, I hope you'd want that, your kid wanting to spend time with you, right? If you want to get in the best shape of your life, you should only do things and continue experimenting until that result becomes within reaching distance of you, right? Results, 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 results. That is the name of the game in order for you to have the belief to be decisive, right? Now, in the beginning, we're decisive from a place of blind ambition, right? That then transitions to informed pessimism, right? So the question is, how do we get to what I call informed ambition, right? Blind ambition, informed pessimism. Blind ambition, informed pessimism. This is what you hear from like the serial wantrepreneurs, right? They're like, oh, I started another business. I got 10 businesses. Each of them are doing $5,000 a year, but I got 10 businesses. I'm super busy, right? Like, you would be so much better off owning to yourself that all these things are distractions, right? Everything that you're doing is a distraction, right? You'd be better off finishing one thing to completion, right? And proving to yourself that, I can finish one thing. I can be decisive about one thing. I can finish one thing. I can be decisive about one thing. I can finish one thing, right? So blind ambition and informed ambition. What's the difference? Blind ambition is when you have no experience towards something, right? So that serial entrepreneur who has blind ambition will go, oh, I have an idea. I have an invention, right? I'm going to create a business. So it's just constant blind ambition after blind ambition after blind ambition, right? The best entrepreneurs, they choose one blind ambition early in their career. And most times it is blind, right? Most people who start their own businesses, it's blind in the beginning because you don't have enough experience to not be blind as to whether or not the choice you're making is the right choice, right? So most businesses start from a place of blind ambition, right? When you put all of yourself into that blind ambition decision, right, you're going to then learn and accumulate informed pessimism, right? This is when problems happen, things don't go to plan, X, Y, and Z issues occur, right? That turns to informed pessimism. Now you start doubting your blind ambition because now you have a different lens through which you see the world from all the experience that you accumulated, right? Okay. Then how do you take the raw materials from the failure, otherwise known as experience that you've accumulated, and how do you turn that into informed ambition, right? Informed ambition. Okay, I am informed about what didn't work. I am informed about the things we tried that were harder than expected. I am informed about my failures, right? And in spite of that, and in response to that, here's my adjusted ambition, right? Maybe part of your informed pessimism taught you that you actually didn't really want to be in this business, right? You kind of wanted to change it and be in a slightly different business. Great. Our level of ambition doesn't change. We just change a little bit the steering of the ship, and that's called course correction. If you look at any of the breakthrough tech companies that have made billions and billions and billions of dollars, they were one steering of the ship away, one informed ambition away from a breakthrough, right? So, Facebook started as college campus networking, right, online. And Amazon started as just an internet bookstore, right? And now look at, what Meta does and their business model. They make billions of dollars a year from Facebook ads, right? Which you would have never expected from just a college, social network for colleges, right? You look at Amazon, they sell almost every product on planet Earth, and it started just a bookstore. And that's one course correction at a time. That's an example of two people who took real-time market feedback, and instead of letting those failures turn into informed pessimism and then lowering their goal, they took the marketplace feedback and they turned it into informed, call it informed optimism or informed ambition, right? And their ambition level stayed the same. They changed their course correction a little bit. Boom, burned the ships back to full commitment. When I was repeating my goals every single day at the very early stages of starting my company, I would recite my goals as though it was like, my favorite sports team winning the championship every single morning. I would state it with such enthusiasm, so much certainty. There was nothing that could convince me of anything otherwise, right? No matter how many adversities would occur throughout the week, I would constantly rehearse myself. And especially when I felt like I lost belief in the goal, right? Those are the days I would repeat my goal to myself maybe 50 times, right? Until maybe by the 49th time of saying it, I actually believed it. But for the 48 times I said it, I didn't believe it once, right? Those are the hard days. That's when your belief is challenged, right? And you have to cultivate that gung-ho ambition, that belief within yourself to go back to that kind of childlike imagination and optimism. And with no optimism, it's really impossible to achieve big goals in your life or your business. No optimism, it's like, telling yourself, oh, I'm going to go to the gym every single day and I'm probably going to get fat, right? That is obviously not going to motivate anyone to get up and go to the gym or change their nutrition, right? So you have to have optimism. You have to believe that something great is going to happen as a result of your pursuit, right? And oftentimes, the only way that we're able to have the imagination of what that great is going to look like is through other people or other sources of knowledge like books, right? Because I know for me, growing up, I didn't have any mentors that showed me what the outcome or what the payoff would be of me running a company like I do today, right? No one told me. The only way that I was able to sell myself on this was through mentors, really mentors and books that I read of people who had had wildly successful lives. And I saw myself in their stories. I said to myself, wow, what if I could accomplish something like them? It was all optimism, right? Yes, some of it's informed pessimism from what I learned from these people, but most of it was, man, I want this and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this, right? And we need more of that. And you can't do that by just operating on historical data and the past, right? We have to break free from what we think is possible, and someone's got to take a leap for something bigger than they thought possible at some point in time. Someone's got to take a leap, right? And I hope as a result of today's podcast, you take a leap. Like, you decide what is that next big decision that you're going to make. Decide, commit, act, succeed, repeat. Decide, commit, act, succeed, repeat. Make that decision. Okay? Commit to a plan. Take the first big scary action as quickly as you possibly can. Succeed. See some initial success. Hunt for initial success. You need to be on the hunt for success, because success is what's going to motivate you and reinforce that all that self-belief you had was merited, right? Was deserved, right? And then repeat. How do I raise the bar again? How do I set an even bigger goal next time? How do I resell myself on the why? How do I resell myself on an even bigger outcome and an even bigger payoff in the future? This is super hard, but super critical to do if you want to see disproportionate positive results in your life. So be decisive and understand that decisiveness and clarity on what the goal is, these two things are hand in hand. You have to decide what the goal is. You have to commit to it. Understand that when you are decided and committed to where you want to go in all areas of your life, it is going to make it that much easier for you to focus. And if focus is the key to you achieving your outcomes in life, and you're focused on the things that you actually want and achieving the things you actually want, and results-oriented focus, right? Then there's no telling where you're going to be 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years from today, just by starting with an increased energy and an attunement to exactly where you want to go in each area of your life. So reflect on this, go on a walk outside, meditate, journal, doodle. Just make sure you walk away with a clear picture of exactly what you want. And I promise you, for me, this has had probably the biggest impact. It's also something at the times of my life I violated this, is where my progress stopped. It's basically like slamming on the brakes of progress in your life when you lose track of where you want to go and what you want, right? So do not tread water. I'm talking to myself right now. Don't tread water. Don't just, accept what your fate is, right? Change your fate. Get clear on what you want your fate to be and decide what that outcome is, and start right now. And make this a consistent repetition, something you do every morning, every night, every week, of recalibrating that emotional certainty of where you want to be. All right, I'll see you in the next episode. If you found value in this podcast, here's one way I can help your firm right now. First, you can get our new book, Law Firm Growth Accelerator. It's everything we've learned over 10 plus years helping lawyers build thriving, profitable firms. The strategies that you'll get in this book work for any practice area and any revenue level. You can get the audiobook and ebook 100% free, or just cover the shipping and we'll send you the physical copy to you in addition to the audio and ebook. Go to smbteam.com/book to get your copy.